and he came to the house of a king who had a fair daughter. Her name was Gudrun, and her mother was a witch. Now Gudrun fell in love with Sigurd, but he always was talking of Brunhild, and how beautiful she was, and how dear. So one day Gudrun's witch mother put poppy and forgetful drugs in a magical cup, and bade Sigurd drink to her health. And he drank, and instantly he forgot poor Brunhild, and he loved Gudrun, and they were married with great rejoicings. Now the witch, the mother of Gudrun, wanted her son Gunnar to marry Brunhild, and she bade him ride out with Sigurd and go and woo her. So forth they rode to her father's house, for Brunhild had quite gone out of Sigurd's mind by reason of the witch's wine, but she remembered him and loved him still. Then Brunhild's father told Gunnar that she would marry none but him who could ride the flame in front of her enchanted tower, and thither they rode, and Gunnar set his horse at the flame, but he would not face it. Then Gunnar tried Sigurd's horse, Granny, but he would not move with Gunnar on his back. Then Gunnar remembered the witchcraft that his mother had taught him, and by his magic he made Sigurd look exactly like himself, and he looked exactly like Gunnar. Then Sigurd, in the shape of Gunnar and in his mail, mounted on Granny, and Granny leapt the fence of fire, and Sigurd went in and found Brunhild, but he did not remember her yet, because of the forgetful medicine in the cup of the witch's wine. Now Brunhild had no help but to promise she would be his wife, the wife of Gunnar as she supposed, for Sigurd wore Gunnar's shape, and she had sworn to wed whoever should ride the flames, and he gave her a ring, and she gave him back the ring that he had given her before in his own shape as Sigurd, and it was the last ring of that poor dwarf Andvari. Then he rode out again, and he and Gunnar changed shapes, and each was himself again, and they went home to the witch queens, and Sigurd gave the dwarf's ring to his wife Gudrun. And Brunhild went to her father and said that a king had come called Gunnar, and he had ridden the fire, and she must marry him. Yet I thought, she said, that no man could have done this deed but Sigurd, Fafnir's bane, who is my true love, but he has forgotten me, and my promise I must keep. So Gunnar and Brunhild were married, though it was not Gunnar but Sigurd in Gunnar's shape that had ridden the fire. And when the wedding was over, and all the feast, then the magic of the witch's wine went out of Sigurd's brain, and he remembered all. He remembered how he had freed Brunhild from the spell, and how she was his own true love, and how he had forgotten and had married another woman, and warned Brunhild to be the wife of another man. But he was brave, and he spoke not a word of it to the others to make them unhappy. Still, he could not keep away the curse which is to come on everyone who had owned the treasure of the dwarf Andvari, and his fatal golden ring. And the curse soon came upon them all, for one day, when Brunhild and Gudrun were bathing, Brunhild waded farthest out into the river, and said she did that to show she was Gudrun's superior. For her husband, she said, had ridden through the flame when no other man dared face it. Then Gudrun was angry, and said that it was Sigurd, not Gunnar, who had ridden the flame, and had received from Brunhild that fatal ring, the ring of the dwarf Andvari. Then Brunhild saw the ring which Sigurd had given to Gudrun, and she knew it and knew all, and she turned as pale as a dead woman and went home. All that evening she never spoke. Next day she told Gunnar, her husband, that he was a coward and a liar, for he had never ridden the flame, but had sent Sigurd to do it for him, and pretended that he had done it himself. And she said he would never see her glad in his hall, never drinking wine, never playing chess, never embroidering with the golden thread, never speaking words of kindness. Then she rent all her needlework asunder and wept aloud, so that everyone in the house heard her. For her heart was broken, and her pride was broken in the same hour. She had lost her true love Sigurd, the slayer of Fafnir, and she was married to a man who was a liar. Then Sigurd came and tried to comfort her, but she would not listen, and she said she wished the sword stood fast in his heart. Not long to wait, he said, till the bitter sword stands fast in my heart, and thou wilt not live long when I am dead. But, dear Brunhild, live and be comforted, and love Gunnar thy husband, and I will give thee all the gold, the treasure of the dragon Fafnir. Brunhild said, It is too late. Then Sigurd was so grieved, and his heart so swelled in his breast, that it burst the steel rings of his shirt of mail. Sigurd went out, and Brunhild determined to slay him. She mixed serpent's venom and wolf's flesh, and gave them in one dish to her husband's younger brother. And when he had tasted of them, he was mad, and he went into Sigurd's chamber while he slept, and pinned him to the bed with a sword. But Sigurd woke, caught the sword Graham into his hand, and threw it at the man as he fled, and the sword cut him in twain. Thus died Sigurd, Fafnir's bane, whom no 10 men could have slain in fair fight. Then Gudrun wakened and saw him dead, and she moaned aloud, and Brunhild heard her and laughed. But the kind horse Granny lay down and died of very grief. And then Brunhild fell a-weeping till her heart broke. So they attired Sigurd in all his golden armour, and built a great pile of wood on board his ship, and at night laid on it the dead Sigurd and the dead Brunhild and the good horse Granny, and set fire to it, and launched the ship, and the wind bore it blazing out to sea, flaming into the dark. So there were Sigurd and Brunhild burned together, and the curse of the dwarf Andvari was fulfilled. End of chapter 37. The Story of Sigurd. Recording by Wendelin. February 1st, 2009. End of the Red Fairy book by Andrew Lang.